The success of the statesmanship of Vajpayee with respect to the nuclear tests, I think goes beyond during the time of another statesman action by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, when the Indo-US nuclear deal was signed in 2006, I think. Because that was one of the most difficult negotiations, but it was based on whatever was done by Prime Minister Vajpayee's government and the decisions which were taken by him. But Mr. Vajpayee, I think he was an exception. He was very fully passionate about foreign affairs. I recall an instance. It was, I think, March or April of 1999, when there was a lot of commotion, a lot of things were happening in the Indian Parliament. I think that was also when the no confidence motion against his government took place, which he lost by one vote. That was the time there were a number of proposals for visits from foreign countries, and we had the proposal of President-elect of Nigeria, Obasanjo, planning to come to Delhi. In PMO or in MEA, we thought that Prime Minister is so busy now, how can he meet Obasanjo at such a date? But he said no, he will meet him. And we ourselves were surprised that Prime Minister finding time to meet Nigerian President-elect in the midst of all such things. So that only showed how much interest he has in foreign affairs, in countries of Africa, countries of Asia, everywhere.
Unfortunately, that particular visit to China could not achieve much because China, during his visit, attacked Vietnam, and our delegation decided to cut short its visit and return to India prematurely. That time I realized that his defining qualities were moderation and geniality. These were also reflected in his foreign policy, as we shall see.
This is our second lecture under Pune International Center's Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee Birth Centenary Lecture Series. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome our speakers. We had our inaugural lecture by the eminent journalist and former Rajya Sabha member Shri Kumar Ketkar on August 7th. And today's discussion is on Shri Vajpayee's foreign policy and its approach to India's foreign policy. Ambassador Devare is the founder member of PIC, and we have had the privilege of turning to him and listening to his perspectives on international affairs from time to time. In February this year, at the Asia Economic Dialogue, he chaired a session on expanding regional connectivity towards more integrated South Asia. In June 22, sir, you chaired a discussion on turmoil in Sri Lanka when Ambassador Rajendra Abhyankar delivered a lecture on the subject. And in August 22, Ambassador Devare spoke on politics and diplomacy at PIC's seminar on the Ukraine crisis, challenges to India's foreign policy. As India's first ambassador to Ukraine, Armenia, and Georgia, Ambassador Devare has spoken on the tragic conflict in that part of the world from time to time on the PIC forum and has helped enrich our understanding on the events there. The chairperson for today's event, Ambassador Madhav Mangalmurti, is a friend of PIC. He is president of the Pune-based think tank, Center for Advanced Strategic Studies. He has served as India's ambassador to Cuba and Switzerland and was the first Indian High Commissioner to South Africa after the end of apartheid. Ambassador Mangalmurti has also served as Joint Secretary, East Europe Division in the Ministry of External Affairs and as advisor to the Indian delegation to the UN General Assembly, among other senior positions. Friends, as we all know, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee was one of the tallest leaders and one of the most loved leaders of India who had an extraordinary 5 decades in Parliament. He was a co-founder of the Bharatiya Jansangh and the Bharatiya Janata Party, and the first non-Congress Prime Minister to serve a full 5 term. Our previous lecture discussed rich insights into Shri Vajpayee's politics and personality and is available on YouTube. In the context of today's discussion, we are reminded of Shri Vajpayee as the External Affairs Minister in Prime Minister Morarji Desai's cabinet in 1977, the Pokhran II nuclear tests in 1998, Shri Vajpayee's repeated efforts to achieve lasting peace with Pakistan, and the setbacks in the form of Kargil and the attack on the Indian Parliament in 2001. Alongside, he also made significant contribution to improving India's relations with China. This Birth Centenary lecture series is a tribute by PIC members to the memories and legacy of Shri Vajpayee, and will cover his approach to politics, diplomacy, economic reforms, science and technology, and his love for art and culture. This series was conceived by our Vice President, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who along with Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar and Dr. Ajit Ranade will be speaking in this series. Before I hand over the floor to Ambassador Mangalmurti, I would like to mention that Pune International Center is a multifaceted policy research think tank which works in a number of areas: national security, international relations, energy, environment and climate change, social innovation, and now we have a Center for Sustainable Energy and Mobility. I may add that our program in urbanization and economic reforms is also very strong, with a number of programs in collaboration with Gokhale Institute. Most of the events at PIC are free and open to the public, and you are welcome to register for our events. Today's session will have a short Q&A segment, and we will now screen a short video capturing the life and times of Shri Vajpayee, followed by the opening remarks by Ambassador Mangalmurti.
Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, a man of the masses, firm in his political convictions. Shri Vajpayee was born in the family of a humble school teacher. His rise in public life is a tribute to both his political acumen and Indian democracy. His first brush with nationalist politics was in his student days when he joined the Quit India movement of 1942. A student of political science and law, it was in college that he developed a keen interest in foreign affairs. Atalji graduated from Victoria College of Gwalior. Later, he obtained a master's degree in political science. He had many literary, artistic and scientific achievements to his name. Many of his books were published, among which 4 Decades in Parliament 1957 to 95, New Dimensions of India's Foreign Policy, etc. are prominent. He had embarked upon a journalist's career, which was cut short in 1951. Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of the country from 16 to 31st March 1996 and then from 19th March 1998 to 13th May 2004. His tenure as a Prime Minister was so glorious that even after a decade, it is not only remembered but also implemented. There have been very few Prime Ministers who have left such a positive impact on society. Shri Vajpayee ji was awarded Padma Vibhushan in 1992. In 2015, he was decorated with the title of India's highest civilian honour, Bharat Ratna. Remembering Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, a leader, poet and visionary.
Dr. Kelkar, Ambassador Devare, and distinguished audience, among whom I see a number of friends. I feel honored to have been asked to chair this event. Ambassador Devare needs no introduction here. Nevertheless, I'll say a few words about him. I have known him as a colleague and a close friend for over 40 years. He has had a distinguished career in the Foreign Service, having served as ambassador to Ukraine, South Korea, and Indonesia, as well as Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. He has also done academic and research work in Singapore and Harvard. He has interacted with Prime Minister Vajpayee when he was Secretary MEA. He is therefore eminently qualified to speak on today's topic. India's foreign policy has been a continuum. It has been based on national consensus at most times. While generally following this practice, Vajpayee ji took some important initiatives. He contributed to India's foreign policy in 3 different phases, as was mentioned in the introduction. The first as foreign minister from 1977 to 1979, then as leader of opposition, and finally as prime minister from 1998 to 2003. My only personal contact with him occurred when I was a commissioner in Hong Kong, and he was a Minister for External Affairs. In 1979, he was leading a delegation to China, and they had to transit through Hong Kong. During a short halt, Atalji addressed the Indian diaspora there. I saw his captivating oratory, which held his audience spellbound. Unfortunately, that particular visit to China could not achieve much because China, during his visit, attacked Vietnam, and our delegation decided to cut short its visit and return to India prematurely. That time I realized that his defining qualities were moderation and geniality. These were also reflected in his foreign policy, as we shall see. His first and most important decision was the nuclear weapons test in 1998. His predecessor, Mr. Narasimha Rao, had actually planned it, but had to back down under extreme pressure from the Americans. The test was carried out within 2 months of his taking over as Prime Minister. I think it was in May 98. This haste was necessary because there was a possibility of the CTBT coming into effect, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, in which case the pressure on India not to undertake a test would have been immense. Here I have a suspicion that Ambassador Brajesh Mishra must have played an important role in persuading the Prime Minister to go for this test. Because Ambassador Mishra and I worked together in Geneva in the disarmament conference, and we had the unenviable task in 1974 of trying to tell everyone that that test was a peaceful nuclear test. Mr. Vajpayee's decision to have the nuclear test was a seminal decision, which has tremendously increased India's status and security. Although there was an initial setback in our relations with some countries. The test broke the straitjacket in which all countries had been put after the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which limited the nuclear powers to only 5 and no more ever. The test caused a small earthquake in our relations with a number of countries, and particularly the United States. It took calm heads and patient diplomacy on both sides to overcome this blip. In the immediate aftermath, to calm the waters, India came up with a statement that it would not be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict, or what is called the NFU, doctrine. India also declared a moratorium on further tests. I do not know if any country was convinced by such a declaration, but it had some negative impact on us. Pakistan, which carried out its own nuclear tests within a few days later, did not issue any NFU pledge. I think instead of unilaterally declaring NFU, we should have invited Pakistan to make a joint NFU statement. And if they had refused, they would have been exposed. As far as no first use goes, except China, no other nuclear weapon country has subscribed to this doctrine. We did pay a psychological price for our doctrine. It created doubts and uncertainty in the minds of our defense forces as well as decision makers. For several years after that, we were hesitant to act firmly against terrorist attacks by Pakistani agents. India reacted weakly to the attack on Mumbai and on our parliament. This continued for many years, and these fears were put to rest during Prime Minister Modi's tenure when we carried out surgical strike at Uri and air strikes in Balakot, deep inside Pakistan. It is believed that we also threatened Pakistan with missile strikes if Abhinandan was not immediately released. The fact that both the nuclear weapon countries did not, that both countries were nuclear weapon countries did not deter us from this. The message was clear that no country would resort to nuclear weapons till the red lines were crossed. So we did not be alarmist about having a small conflict. Only if the red lines are crossed, then the country may react by using nuclear weapons. India has a long and unfortunate tradition of unilateral concessions. NFU perhaps was one example of it. We called for ceasefire in Kashmir in 1948 when our army had an upper hand and a few more weeks would have achieved complete victory. After the 1965 war, we succumbed to pressure and returned Hajipir to Pakistan. After China's occupation of Tibet, we recognized Chinese suzerainty without first making sure whether they accepted the McMahon line. This is the least we could have done before volunteering to say that we accept Chinese suzerainty over Tibet. After the 71 war, we returned 93,000 Pakistani soldiers without getting anything substantial in return. But this is a bit of a digression. Atalji wanted to improve our relations with Pakistan after the nuclear tests. For this, he undertook the Delhi-Lahore bus trip. His talks with Nawaz Sharif were carried out with great bonhomie and optimism. Unfortunately, at the same time, Musharraf, perhaps without the knowledge of Nawaz Sharif, was sending Pakistani soldiers across the LOC to Kargil. Here, not to escalate the conflict, Atalji ordered the Air Force not to cross the LOC. So strangely, Pakistan could cross the LOC with impunity, but our troops were asked not to. This prevented escalation but prolonged the conflict and caused higher casualties on our side. It also made the LOC look like an international boundary, weakening our claim that POK was a part of India. This policy has now changed, and our demand to get POK back has become more strident, thus improving our bargaining position in an eventual settlement of J&K. Otherwise, I remember during my years of service, whenever we had a meeting with Pakistan over Kashmir, they demanded a concession from us on Kashmir in return for any normalization that they would do for India, which was very unfair. Mr. Vajpayee's other major initiative was in regard to China, where during his 2003 visit, he recognized Tibet as a part of China. In fact, a year later, China recognized Sikkim as a part of India. So it was a quid pro quo. China, in fact, delayed by a year to recognize Sikkim as a part of India. So it was a worrying thing that we recognized Tibet while they have not yet made a statement. This visit definitely led to an improvement in relations between India. The other thing was that the Prime Minister appointed a special representative from him to deal with a special representative from China on the border question. Although unfortunately no substantive demarcation happened, but I think it did improve the relations between two countries, lowered the temperature between the two countries. I think Ambassador Devare would be able to elaborate more on this, whether the exchange of, whether the trade-off of recognizing Tibet in return for China recognizing Sikkim as a part of India was worthwhile, whether we gained from it. Prime Minister Vajpayee was a very genial person. He was called Ajat Shatru, no enemies. It is a continuing theme in our foreign policy to give the impression that we are a tolerant, non-violent and peaceful nation that will avoid conflict at all costs. Perhaps this stems from the Gandhian policy of non-violence, but some countries take it as weakness. I feel that this image encourages our enemies to create trouble for us. In international relations, it is better to look fearsome so that our enemies do not mess with us. If you look at China, North Korea or Iran, you will see that even more powerful countries than them avoid conflict with them. I mean, look at a comparison of North Korea and Japan or United States, but nobody touches North Korea. Our foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi has evolved. We have given up efforts to normalize relations with Pakistan. We have learned to live as if Pakistan does not exist. It only exists for us in as much as it continues to send terrorists into Jammu and Kashmir. The message to Pakistan is clear. If the scale of terrorism crosses certain limits, India will retaliate forcefully, as we did in Balakot. With China, we have strengthened the forces on our border and improved the logistics. Any transgression by China will no longer be permitted. However, we feel that ignoring China is not possible. It is the second biggest economic entity. Our industry is dependent on Chinese products. We have therefore to learn to live with a troublesome neighbor and avoid military conflict as much as possible. Our policy of non-alignment, which was one of the pillars of our policy for a long time, has also undergone a subtle change. We have overcome the inhibition of aligning with other important countries. Instead of non-alignment, we think in terms today of different degrees of alignment with different countries. Without overcoming this psychological barrier of non-alignment, we would not have joined an organization like the Quad or perhaps even the CSO. How independent and strong a country's foreign policy can be depends on its military and economic strength and its political unity inside the country. to have strategic autonomy, one has to be Atmanirbhar in many different fields, but particularly in the field of defense. And I think India has now made a good start in that. I do not want to stand anymore between you and our speaker for today, Ambassador Devare. I think I made enough controversial statements for him to come out with an interesting and enlightening discourse. Thank you.
I invite Ambassador Devare to deliver this lecture. So the stage is yours.
Good evening, Dr. Kerkar, Shri Suresh Pingre, Dr. Radhanade, Dr. Jayant Umranikar, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege to be here at PIC to speak on a subject about which my old friend and today's chairman, Ambassador Mangalmurti, has spoken very extensively with great knowledge. I believe that for anyone, for any society to be effective, it has to leave, a leader has to be effective. He has to leave behind assets of long-term nature or assets and achievements of such nature that legacy will last for a long time. And it is the celebration of the legacy of Prime Minister Vajpayee that the PIC has undertaken in the form of this series of lectures, which is really very commendable. Because as was pointed out earlier, that even after 10 years of his passing away and nearly 20 years after he demitted office, his contributions are still deeply remembered. The topic that was suggested to me was foreign policy approaches and his foreign policy during the time, well, from his younger days to prime ministership. Foreign affairs, actually, for a politician, is not a particularly attractive subject. I think perhaps the number of persons who are knowledgeable in foreign affairs in a country are very small, and therefore, electorally also, it cannot be a very attractive proposition. But Mr. Vajpayee, I think he was an exception. He was very fully passionate about foreign affairs. I recall an instance. It was, I think, March or April of 1999, when there was a lot of commotion, a lot of things were happening in the Indian Parliament. I think that was also when the no confidence motion against his government took place, which he lost by 1 vote. That was the time there were a number of proposals for visits from foreign countries, and we had the proposal of President-elect of Nigeria, Obasanjo, planning to come to Delhi. In PMO or in MEA, we thought that Prime Minister is so busy now, how can he meet Obasanjo at such a date? But he said no, he will meet him. And we ourselves were surprised that Prime Minister finding time to meet Nigerian President-elect in the midst of all such things. So that only showed how much interest he has in foreign affairs, in countries of Africa, countries of Asia, everywhere. Not to talk of the neighbors and the major powers. From what we saw earlier, that even from his younger days, Vajpayee ji was interested in foreign affairs. He was writing books on foreign affairs, even as a college student. He joined the Indian Parliament at a relatively young age. And that was the time India-China war was actually raging. He was a backbencher, of course, but with his oratory and his fierce nationalism, he had already started attracting attention of the main leaders of the country, including Prime Minister Nehru. And Prime Minister Nehru, to his credit, that debates on China were going on in the parliament, in which Shri Vajpayee took very active part. Prime Minister Nehru was impressed by that. He complimented young Atal Bihari ji and in fact said that one day you will become Prime Minister of the country. I think his words were really prophetic. After that, during Indira Gandhi's time, in the early years, he and the Congress, he was a member of the Jan Sangh that time, they had a lot of criticism on policies like the bank nationalization or the abolition of privy purses and so on. But there were two major events in which the opposition and opposition leaders like Atal Bihari ji fully supported Indira Gandhi. One was Pokhran first, and the second was, of course, 1971 Bangladesh war. He had that largeness of heart to even commend her when he said that she was like Durga. I think from an opposition leader to come like this kind of accolade was really remarkable. In 1977, soon after the emergency, the loss of Indira Gandhi's election, when the Janta government was formed, Vajpayee ji became the foreign minister. That was a post to his heart because he had always felt very close to foreign affairs. And during that time, when he was asked what policy the new government, Janta government, will follow, and he said, what policy? We already have the policy which has been given to us by Jawaharlal Nehru, policy of non-alignment. We will follow that. And he decided to, there is also a much talked about incident when he asked Nehru's photograph, which he used to see in the South Block very often, but when he joined the ministry, it was removed. And he was not happy. So he asked people why this photograph was removed, and he got it replaced again. So the outline of foreign policy that Shri Vajpayee followed throughout was based on certain principles of non-violence. Now today we call it multi-alignment, strategic autonomy. The basic principles, basic ideas of the policy are the same. Ambassador Mangalmurti very eloquently elaborated just now that we have different levels or different grades of alignment today, but essentially the policy remained the same. He decided to visit China. That was something which he had in the 60s and early 70s thought much about. India-China diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level were restored only in 1976. And Vajpayee decided to go there. He did go, as was just now mentioned. Unfortunately, the visit had to be cut short because of the Chinese invasion of Vietnam. But that showed his clear thinking, his very quick decision-making also, that in a situation like this, howsoever China was important, howsoever the visit was important, he just could not go through that. He cut short the visit and came back. His interest in Vietnam, however, continued. I remember as a Prime Minister, he sent George Fernandez, was the defense minister, to Vietnam. It was a kind of a preparatory meeting because in 2001, January, he went to Vietnam. I had the pleasure of accompanying him to Vietnam that time. And during that visit, I think the basis or the foundations of the defense relationship that we have with Vietnam was really established and further strengthened. He had the curiosity of even meeting General Giap, the legendary Vietnamese hero, during that visit. Shri Vajpayee ji later on became, after 1980, when the government of Indira Gandhi came back, he was no more in the parliament. He became the leader of opposition at that time. Even when he was leader of opposition or when he was in the government, every time, because of his suaveness, his moderation, his very balanced approach to foreign affairs, government selected him as the member of the delegation to the United Nations. And Vajpayee ji always took very keen interest in the UN matters as well. The test came in 1993 when in the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, Pakistan brought a resolution which was again on Kashmir and was a very, very damaging resolution. And the composition of the HRC was such that it appeared that they could have their way. In fact, that was a very, very difficult time for all of us. I recall, and I think Ambassador Mangalmurti will also recall, we received, all of us, all missions in abroad received a notification from Delhi that please tell the governments, and particularly governments which were represented in the HRC, that if they did not vote for India, then the consequences will have to be borne by them. I do not recall this kind of a stern warning from the government at that time. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Shri Vajpayee had very good equation. In 1992, Narasimha Rao ji had established relations with Israel, a subject which was of very dear to Shri Vajpayee and the Jansangh before and the BJP. They had such a good equation that Prime Minister Rao decided to ask Mr. Vajpayee to be the leader of the delegation. Even though in the delegation there were ministers, I think Salman Khurshid was one of the ministers. But the delegation at Geneva was led by Shri Vajpayee. And our ambassador at that time, Satish Chandra, tells me it was really the work that was done in unison by all members of the delegation, regardless of the party affiliation. So whenever the national issue comes at that kind of stage, then we forget all the differences. And that was an excellent example of working together. But Vajpayee ji had, of course, his own humorous sense. He said, you know, in selecting me as the leader of the delegation, the government has been very clever. Because if the vote goes in our favor, the credit will go to the government. But if we lose the vote, there will be no opposition in the parliament. Pakistan was his always a point of great worry as well as concern. And also he was optimistic about Pakistan. That is essentially because his foreign policy in that sense was quite open and clear-headed. He felt that India should have good relations with all countries. There was no need for us. Even with the countries with which we had adverse relations, we can resolve them by discussions, by dialogue. There was no need to isolate ourselves. And he had even said that he endorsed Gujarat doctrine, except Pakistan, because Pakistan didn't believe in that. Pakistan was resorting to cross-border terrorism. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind accepting the principles of Gujarat doctrine, that means good relations without reciprocity with all neighbors. And therefore, with Pakistan, he was still hoping. And therefore, within a few months of the nuclear test, I'll come to that, he has discussed it at great length. So he decided to go to Lahore, because he used to also hear from various sources that Pakistani citizens felt insecure about India. They felt that Indians have not accepted partition. And he said, there's no such thing. We have accepted partition. Now we are different countries. We have sovereign countries. So he decided to go to Pakistan to meet with Nawaz Sharif. Bus diplomacy from Amritsar to Lahore is well known. Then he went to Minare, Pakistan, where he signed in the book that India wishes Pakistan all well. India respects its sovereignty, its territorial integrity. This was something unbelievable for a man of his background to come out there and say that sovereignty and territorial integrity of Pakistan is sacrosanct for us was something which was, I think, unheard of. But he did that. Unfortunately, his general, Nawaz Sharif's general, was not on the same page, and we had the Kargil experience. Pakistani soldiers on these mountain slopes of Kargil crossing the LOC, and it took the bravery and great sacrifice of the Indian armed forces to finally drive them back. Even at that time, when negotiations were going on and President Clinton had invited Nawaz Sharif to Washington, the question, Vajpayee ji was very firm that they had to be driven completely out of up to LOC. There was no question of any negotiation. And finally, India had the Vijay Divas, and Kargil matter was sorted out. That was, of course, a setback to his efforts, but he had great patience and perseverance in this. And within a few months, again, another setback event took place. That was the IC-814 Indian Airlines plane was hijacked from Nepal through Amritsar to Pakistan, and then finally to Kandahar. Well, it was a great tragedy, and he had to finally, on humanitarian grounds, it's a matter, of course, much debated even now whether we should have done that or not. But I think that was a decision which was a very, very hard decision for him to take, to ask his foreign minister to take 3 Pakistani terrorists in the same plane to Kandahar for the release of the IC plane and the passengers on board. So there were such incidents which were happening, but I think his belief that India-Pakistan relations had to be put together, had to be normalized, resolved, continued. And again in 2001, in July, after all this, he invites Musharraf to India for the Agra summit. Now the Agra summit was again, it was hoped that there will be some breakthrough, some positive movement will take place. Even that failed, because while India wanted a full-fledged discussion on the nuclear issue, on the Kashmir issue, on cross-border terrorism, Musharraf's agenda was only one item, that was Kashmir, and therefore these talks failed. In December, again in a few months' time, attack on the Indian Parliament was one of the most horrendous things which were happening. Vajpayee ji ordered Indian army to immediately put across, kind of a challenge to the Pakistanis. The Operation Parakram, some 5 lakh army personnel were mobilized and sent to the borders. And this went on for nearly 1 year. I remember I was in the National Security Advisory Board that time, and we had discussions on this question all the time. And we were wondering, there were views on both sides, whether we should act, we should not act. And finally, it was Prime Minister's decision that we should not have any military action. And at that time, there was a statement from General Musharraf, which was kind of was conciliatory, and as a result, demobilization took place. So that was the Agra summit. Well, the Operation Parakram aftermath. His efforts to normalize relations with Pakistan went on till almost the end of his tenure as Prime Minister. And he went to Pakistan in 2004 January for the SAARC summit. And the SAARC summit, finally he managed to get Pakistan to accept that they will not allow their territory for use against terrorists and against India. So that was the last kind of assurance he received from Pakistan. And then, of course, his government later on fell, and his efforts towards normalizing relations with Pakistan did not really see fruition. Ambassador Mangalmurti referred to his efforts in China. I think 1993 and 1996, during the time of Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, 2 major agreements were signed with China. As you know, with China, the dialogue has gone on and for many, many years. And in 1988, when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited China, and he had meetings with Deng Xiaoping. That was the time when there was some forward movement with China appeared possible. So that was, in a way, pursued by the next government. 93 and 96, you had the agreement on peace and tranquility on the borders. So that was again a major step forward in the relations between India and China. So in 2003, we in a way accepted because the Tibet is the part of China that was not formally conceded, in a sense, agreed by us. That was done, and we, as a quid pro quo, got the agreement from Chinese about the status of Sikkim. Although Sikkim was integrated with India in 1975, its formal status recognition was done by China in 2004. So that sort of settled the status question of Sikkim. Well, with China, the problem continues. The special representatives which was set up, that mechanism which was set up by Prime Minister Vajpayee, that has been functioning. It has, for example, now we know 15, 18 rounds of the people's representatives talks have been held. But I think there are bigger issues than that. And the Chinese position on this is so hard now, I don't know whether we can really have any prospects of peace despite the mechanism available. We have a number of mechanisms that plus the military level talks which have been conducted at Galwan after the Chinese occupation in 2000, going on and so on. So these are, you see, in the case of foreign affairs, such developments keep taking place. You cannot expect results in one prime minister or one foreign minister's tenure. And therefore, that continuity of talks, negotiations is a process which everybody has to accept. I think this is what we can see in the relations between India and China, India and Pakistan, or China and India. Well, one of the most outstanding decisions, as was referred by Ambassador Mangalmurti, was the nuclear test, which Prime Minister Vajpayee conducted within a few days of his occupying the post of Prime Minister in 1998. He was gracious enough to accept or to acknowledge that it was not his party's or his decision alone. It was prepared, work has gone on for 50 years before that, and therefore it was a kind of a decision which only came to him because of the circumstances. In 1995, I think Prime Minister Narasimha Rao had already tried to do that, and it was the American satellite which saw the pictures of Pokhran preparations going on, and therefore American ambassador apparently came and thumbed the photographs in front of him and said, no, this is not acceptable, and so on. But that only shows that this was a decision which was taken by the government of Vajpayee ji, which had in their manifesto always said that they would take action about nuclear tests. But as I said, he had, even in the speech which he gave after the Pakistani nuclear test took place on 27th of May 1998, it was a very powerful speech Vajpayee ji gave in the Indian Parliament. And he surveyed the whole nuclear scene very extensively. There again he said that Rajiv Gandhi in 1985 had said in the press club of Delhi that if necessary, India will have to build nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons, I think, is a subject on which there has been a broad consensus. Right from 1974, when the Pokhran test was conducted. That the Western countries were following very discriminatory, hypocritical policies was criticized by all parties in the country. In 1978, I remember Shri Vajpayee, as foreign minister, came to New York, and he spoke in the special session of the UN special session on disarmament. And I was with him that time. And the speech, again, spoke on the same lines. The outline of the speech was not very different from what used to be in the past. So that was a kind of a continuation of the same policy which has gone on. Non-first use was declared by the government immediately after the test was conducted. Moratorium was declared. I think we even said a few months later that, maybe a year later, that we will never use nuclear weapons against anybody. So maybe that left a kind of a sense of ambiguity or sense of uncertainty in the minds. But maybe, but I don't know whether it has really, in a way, harmed our security. because Musharraf's threats that they will use nuclear weapons from time to time, I don't think they were taken that seriously in India. I mean, we never thought that he's going to attack India with nuclear weapons, given the fact that we ourselves are a nuclear weapon state and that we have the capacity to destroy entire Pakistan. That I think the Pakistani knew very well. I think the same applies to even today China, because the kind of capacity we have with our Agni and SSBNs and so on, even the Chinese know that their cities are well within the reach of the Indian missiles. So I don't know whether, but that was a kind of an assurance given by India at the time of 1998 tests, that India, which has all along called for disarmament, nuclear disarmament, called for peace, and strongly advocated measures by nuclear weapon states to destroy their nuclear arsenals, had not done so. They were insisting on the other hand that India signed CTBT. So India has therefore acted in self-defense entirely on its own, suffering from the sanctions for 45 years, and still build the nuclear weapons. So this is the kind of self-reliance that India has, the discipline India showed, and the resolve that India had with respect to nuclear weapons. I think he made it very clear to President Clinton immediately after this decision, after the test, that the covert, the overt capacity of a neighbor state which has conducted naked aggression against India, and the covert, because at that time Pakistan was still not openly nuclear for those few days, covert capacity of our another neighbor which has been indulging in cross-border terrorism and which has attacked India on several occasions, is a serious threat to India, and that's why India has conducted the nuclear test. This was written by Prime Minister Vajpayee to Clinton within a few days of the conduct of the test. So I think we made our position very clear, and immediately diplomatic engagement was started with Jaswant Singh and Strobe Talbot talks, which went on for about a year, which brought this issue, and I remember very well, because in different fora, we were at that time going out and explaining our nuclear position, trying to tell people that India had acted in great moderation. I was in Manila at that time. We had the entire range of countries which were present, all lambasting India. But within a year, the issue was more or less blown over. The success of the statesmanship of Vajpayee with respect to the nuclear tests, I think goes beyond during the time of another statesman action by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, when the Indo-US nuclear deal was signed in 2006, I think. Because that was one of the most difficult negotiations, but it was based on what was done by Prime Minister Vajpayee's government and the decisions which were taken by him. So I think that kind of continuity in the Indian foreign policy, which he very much pursued throughout his, and he himself said that many decisions which I am taking now, and they are not going to be permanent, they have to be continued. Foreign policy is a continuing process, and I am only just doing my duty, contributing in my own time. So I think his contributions are immense. I would like to conclude with a few reminiscences, because I can't claim to be really very close, in the sense I have a close insight in the foreign policy mechanism of Mr. Vajpayee, but I worked with him for nearly 2 years, two and a half years, and I had the occasion to often go and brief him, because whenever there was a visit of a foreign minister or prime minister of any country, I had to go and brief him for 15 minutes or half an hour. And it was one of the most pleasant experiences. He was extremely genial. He was very punctual, always available, regardless of his so many preoccupations. The briefing time, I used to be just ushered in. It used to be one-on-one meeting, and conversation was always in Hindi. And my brief used to be on the table next to him, and I always wondered whether he has seen my brief, whether he had the time to see it. And to my surprise, I used to find that he had not only read the brief, but he used to ask me searching questions on that, and which put us really on guard. But in that, sometimes what used to happen was, he was a man of very few words. So if the time was half an hour, and if the briefing ended in 20 minutes, so what do you do for next 10 minutes? तो प्राईम मिनिस्टर बरोबर ते आगळपगळ हवामानाच्या गोष्टी ते करू शकत नाही ना, त्यामुळे इट यूज टू बी व्हेरी डिफिकल्ट. बट फॉर्च्युनेटली Brajesh Mishra would come, Shakti Sinha would come. Another very interesting occasion of a briefing, because whenever I must have gone with him 5-6 times abroad on visits, and that was, of course, again very nice, because he was so informal during the flights. There is always a cabin for a prime minister where he has a bed and he has a table, conference kind of a thing. So after the flights take off, Vijay, you know that I'm just. So he would call me inside to brief him of the next country where we were going, and to brief him. And so after that, but he took press corps with him whenever he went abroad. So all these people were 20-30 journalists, leading journalists from the country were also with him. So after a while, he would come out and he will join the press. He will sit there, and they will have a great time chatting with the Prime Minister for half an hour, asking all kinds of questions, joking with him, and so on. So on one such occasion, we were traveling from Durban in South Africa after the non-aligned summit, and we had the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Naveen Ramgoolam, because Prime Minister Vajpayee was also visiting Mauritius. But we sort of worked out some kind of mechanism now of how to go before Mr. Ramgoolam. Otherwise he has to receive us there. So we must reach Mauritius after he reaches. But that was not possible. So we suggested that you also come with us. At the Mauritius airport, you go first out, and there at the entrance receive the Prime Minister. So it was done like this. But on the plane, when he asked me to come and brief him, now I found it rather odd now how to brief both Prime Ministers, and we had number of issues with Mauritius. So I was explaining the Mauritian our point of view, then the Mauritian objection, and vice versa. Mauritian point of view, their proposal, and our objections. But thanks to the genial nature of Shri Vajpayee, all those issues were very easily resolved. And talking about Durban, where Ambassador Mangalmurti was also, not that time but before that, we had a very embarrassing situation at the NAM summit. Nelson Mandela, President of South Africa, he raised Kashmir issue at the NAM summit. Now that was absolutely no. Never before in a conference, NAM conference, Kashmir issue would be raised. I mean, Pakistan was always trying to do that, but they had never succeeded. And Vajpayee ji was there, Fidel Castro was there, so many leaders were there, Kofi Annan was there. Now we were all wondering how to do, what to do now, because this kind of situation was rather unprecedented. But again, that was the style of Shri Vajpayee. That he said he took everything in stride, and we sort of worked out a way that messages were sent to Nelson Mandela ji. I think this is not the format, not the venue to talk about these things. I think that he had done it inadvertently or in his own because of his own style. So Shri Vajpayee had also a very humorous way of, or rather mischievous sometime. I will just mention one more, and then we were in Indonesia and meeting the president, Dr. Abdul Rahman Wahid, another great man. He was a thinker, head of their ulema organization, the biggest NGO in the world, some 40 million membership and so on. Great man. And he had remarkable knowledge about India and fascination for India as well. So while the talks were going on, there was some letter from his NGO, NU, which was shown to Shri Vajpayee. He, I think, gave that letter, where Mr. Vajpayee saw there was a logo of Kumbhakarna. So Vajpayee ji very mischievously asked him, Dr. Wahid, we know in Indonesia you have Ganesha is respected, Sri Ram is respected. We did not know that Kumbhakarna is also respected. So Dr. Wahid said, Excellency, you probably don't know, or you are aware, but your thinking is maybe a little different. You see, Kumbhakarna was a man of great principles. He did not want to see his brother abducting Sita, putting her in imprisonment. So he decided to sleep. He slept. But when the war broke out, there was a call for duty from his brother that everybody will fight. And he woke up and he fought till he died. So we see the sense of duty of this man, and therefore we regard him also great. And that's why we have the logo of Kumbhakarna on the NU letterhead. Well, Vajpayee was a tall leader. I think he was a man rooted in the Indian ethos, but a man with a global vision and global thinking. His policies, his contributions in the form of nuclear test, his congeniality, his approach to relationship with neighbors also. I think during his time, India's relations with South Asian neighbors were generally very good. His modernization, liberalization, globalization, all those things, reforms on the telecom sector. I think a man has really left tremendous legacy. And I think this legacy we today are celebrating, and I'm sure we will continue, generations of India will continue to celebrate. With these words, I would like to pay my tribute to his memory. Thank you very much.
Very simple and small episodic question. Mr. L.C. Jain, he created how did Mr. Vajpayee handle that embarrassing, I don't know if he had a role to play in diffusing that embarrassment. I mean, I don't know if it was an awkward thing, but Mr. L.C. Jain was our ambassador, and he actually made a public statement not in support of our nuclear test, being a Gandhian.
Yeah, he was a Gandhian. He was supporter of a certain philosophy, certain ideas. There were a lot of people in India that time who were not in favor of nuclear tests. He was ambassador, I know.
For a short time, I think.
He was, yeah. So I think after a while he was withdrawn from there. Yeah. Yeah, and Gopal Gandhi went, I think, after that.
Why Gandhi actually replaced me?
Replaced you?
Afterwards.
Was Jain, and then came colleague of ours called Bhasin. Yeah.
It's not a question, just something I remembered after this LC Jain's case. Most of the ambassadors were opposed to the nuclear test.
No.
Mainly because they were not told about it in advance. I mean, I was in Vienna at that time, and this issue was discussed for 72 hours continuously. I won't name the ambassador. He was very surprised that I came to know about test before him. And that was the reason he was against the test. I mean, in lighter vein.
Let me tell you, I was at the time in Cairo. I was with Vice President Krishan Kanji and the Foreign Minister Vasundhara Raje. We were attending G15 summit. While the summit was going on, an embassy employee brought in a chit. He showed it first to Krishan Kanji, who passed it on to Vasundhara Ji, and she gave it to me. He said that India has conducted tests today. So even Vice President of India did not know. That was because I think I heard Mr. Vajpayee's interview with somebody that utmost secrecy had to be observed. Not because he did not trust any of these people, but this is the kind of test or decision which has to be kept absolutely, because if it had leaked, then there were external influences, external powers which were interested in sabotaging it. That's why our embassies did not know it. It's not a surprise at all. I mean, you couldn't.
Actually, it came in CCB telegram, which normally reaches us before it reaches the ambassador. So
but that was after the test was conducted.
After.
Sure. Yeah.
Just very quickly, sorry, I'm monopolizing this. His defense minister said that China is enemy number one.
Yeah.
So how did Vajpayee have a public stand on that?
Yeah, because he issued that letter to Clinton also. In that letter also, he more or less made it clear that it was the overt capacity, overt use of overt actions of the neighbor who has committed aggression against India in 1962. He almost mentioned, without naming directly, rest everyone. So he started it with China and then Pakistan. So enemy one was China.
So I have two very quick questions. How did Vajpayee ji contribute to overcome the Big Brother syndrome that came after the 1988 Maldives coup? And the second is, this is a very generic question, but having looked at Vajpayee ji's both pragmatic and balanced foreign policy approach, how would he have framed his approach towards the foreign policy in today's turbulent times where almost all of our neighbors are going through political turbulences?
Taking the second question first, well, he believed in dialogue. He believed in openness. I think that perhaps he would have advised and would have given perhaps greater weightage for that and tried to remove the misunderstandings or some of the problems. Look, in his time, the Chinese threat or menace in the South Asian theater was not as much as it is today. So the situation has very drastically changed in the last 20 years. When he signed with China this 2003 agreement, the Chinese were at that time still consolidating. China was rising. China was on a kind of a charm offensive in Southeast Asia. All that has changed now. Today, China and Southeast Asia have a major problem in South China Sea. They are all over in our neighboring countries. In Sri Lanka, the Chinese ship is also along with our ship Mumbai. Maldives we know. So that, I think that scenario was not in his time. So perhaps I don't know what he would have done, but again, I think his main instrument was open dialogue and open consultations. In as much as he believed in dialogue within the country also, because he emphasized close consultation on most issues. And he used to say that I will not really take actions entirely on my own, barring this nuclear tests probably. Otherwise, on everything he used to consult with others. Maldives, yeah, I think it was a touch and go for situation in Maldives, India. I think whatever government did that time of Rajiv Gandhi, he endorsed it. I think yeah.
My question is, as career diplomats, how much of influence does a prime minister's political ideology have on the making of a country's foreign policy? What do you think on that? And the second one is, how relevant is the Gujral Doctrine today in the context of South Asia?
Just
Friendship means
friendship with
without expecting reciprocity.
I think with the Gujarat doctrine, personally, I would not be in favor of that. Because if you remember, Prime Minister Gujarat dismantled our intelligence network in Pakistan, which was a terrible thing to do because it takes years to re-establish it. I think we should really base our relations with neighbors, but on reciprocity. It should not be a one-sided concession continuously doled out by India. And what is the second question?
Ideology, how does it?
Ideology, I think, is debatable because, for example, many decisions seem to have been taken by our government, keeping in mind the vote bank. I think this should not really come into the picture when you are thinking of national interest. The election interest should not be a part of it. That is what I feel. So ideology should be kept aside if you can do it. It's not easy, but that is what I would recommend strongly. I think I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah. Most of the decisions, either of Prime Minister Vajpayee or his predecessor from other parties, Congress party and even opposite other parties, were not so much based on ideology. Certain ideological element will be there, I won't deny that, but they were driven by national interest. And I think foreign policy has been largely driven by consensus within the country. The tradition of debate and discussion in Parliament has helped in that context a lot. If that continues, then I think we will not have ideology as driving foreign policy of a country. Now, with respect to Gujral doctrine, no, I agree with him, but there are, I think, cases, some countries with which we can afford to have friendship without any reciprocity, because we can really see India has a certain responsibility in South Asia. Given the size, given the geographical construct, India cannot wish away from that responsibility. I agree that without expecting some from other country, we cannot really take decisions, etc. That's okay. But say what has happened in Bangladesh today. India will have to now bear the situation. So what do we do with this kind of thing? Now, India cannot say. That is what actually the advisor, Mohammad Yunus, 3-4 days before this happened, mentioned that India saying that we do not interfere at all is not acceptable to us. Now, that was a very strong statement. But I think, in a way, it brings out the reality of the situation. So, within a certain selective manner, you have to exercise that Gujarat principle, particularly with respect to small neighbors, or small or big, whatever, yeah.
I just wanted to supplement what I said earlier. I think I always find it surprising that our media and some of our politicians express great concern about events happening in our small neighbors, like even Maldives. I mean, it's Maldives who should be worried about how India will look at those developments, because we can really punish these little countries if they don't behave properly. Even country like Bangladesh, I mean, we seem to get worried that now we will get a number of refugees from there. They are not worried that we will send back the Bangladeshis to Bangladesh if they don't behave. Or we can stop the waters flowing to these countries. I mean, we should be a little stronger, not timid, when we deal with some of these neighbors. That's my view. We should be magnanimous, no doubt, but we should not get too concerned. I mean, Nepal, something happens in Nepal, we get worried. Nepal is not worried about what's happening in India. I have not heard Nepal getting worried. We should be able to control these things, and we should be able to keep our neighbors in line. That is my personal view.
Yes, this question that I have in my mind might appear a little naive, but it's there and I wish to ask it anyway. Were it ever to happen that we take POK, what exactly would be the advantage of having POK as part of India? What would be the advantage? I think it would be a perennial state of rumble with Pakistan. We have Wakhan corridor on top. What exactly would be the advantage of having that?
Well, first of all, we would have ensured the sovereignty, geographical completeness, in a sense, because POK forms part of Jammu and Kashmir, which it is now today. That is the physical part. Economically, I don't know whether it really helps much. Population-wise, large population from POK is actually living in London. You know, the Mirpuris from POK are a major element even in the politics of UK. So, well, we had come very close to signing with Musharraf an agreement, I think 2010 or 11. There were a lot of back channel talks with Pakistan that time. And under that, the talk was of internationalizing the LOC. That means giving up POK completely and signing the international boundary on the present LOC. So that, I think, can answer your question, that we were prepared to do that, provided Pakistan then stops this, they remove their armed forces from the POK elsewhere, various assurances, trade starts between POK and India, and bus service starts. So there was a series of such assurances. If met, we were agreeing for that. So that has not happened now, that has fallen through. But POK remains an emotive issue because of the in the Indian Parliament, for example, de jure, you can say, that I think when we were talking of internationalizing this issue, and even in Simla agreement, it was said that why didn't we do this that time? One of the points of criticism against Indira Gandhi was, why didn't we now finalize the boundary between India and Pakistan at Simla? That means internationalizing the boundary, LOC. That would have meant giving up LOC, giving up POK. Both the Indian Parliament agreed. Just as we are so strong about not accepting the ceding of the part of Aksai Chin by Pakistan to China, our territory, which was ceded by Pakistan to China, we take strong umbrage at that.
May I add my thoughts to this?
Yeah.
I think that taking POK maybe in the distant future, whatever may happen, but by reviving your claim to POK, we at least have a bargaining chip when we talk to Pakistan. Here, if you already say you are prepared to make the LOC the international boundary, what are you then? Pakistan is not happy with it. So every time we meet, we are under pressure to concede more and more. So if we claim POK aggressively, then it is a quid pro quo that you give up your claim, we give up our claim, okay, let's settle on the boundary, if they agree. But I think today the power equations have changed. India is becoming more and more powerful. Pakistan is becoming a basket case. The people of POK look across the LOC and see a prosperous J&K, while conditions in POK are horrible at the moment. Look what happened to Balochistan. They are very similar in POK. So one day if POK may fall into our lap without our doing anything because they may say we want to reunite with the people for economic and other reasons. But at least in the immediate future, it at least gives us a bargaining chip by claiming POK more aggressively. If we say we are prepared to settle on the LOC, we have nothing to negotiate then with Pakistan.
So in a way, we did not agree at Simla. That was a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was okay then is not okay now.
No, even that time, if we had accepted.
Yeah.
Due to crunch of time, we'll stop here. If there are any questions, I think we can take it after session. I request Dr. Kerkar to present the PIC books to our distinguished guests. On behalf of Pune International Center, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone for attending this second session on the Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee lecture series, focusing on PM Vajpayee's approach to Indian foreign policy. We are especially thankful to Ambassador Sudhir Devare for sharing his enlightening perspectives on the late Prime Minister Vajpayee. Ambassador Devare's first-hand insights into his tenure has greatly enriched our understanding of India's external affairs at that time, and his remarks and his anecdotes of the late Shri Vajpayee's views on issues that threw some light on our policy and situations during that era. We would also like to extend our sincere thanks to Ambassador Mangalmurti for chairing this session. His remarks on relations with our other countries, especially Pakistan and China, enriched today's discussion, and his invaluable contribution has been a cornerstone of our dialogue. Their guidance and active participation continue to inspire PIC in our mission to spread knowledge and awareness. We would also like to extend our sincere gratitude to all our distinguished guests. Your engagement have significantly enhanced today's conversation. And lastly, a special thank you to the PIC team. Your hard work behind the scenes has assured the smooth execution of this event. Please stay connected with us through PIC's social media channels for updates on future events. We have our next session on in the Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee lecture series, which will be held on 30 September, and it will focus on India's economic policy and economic reforms during Prime Minister Vajpayee's tenure. We will have Dr. Kaikar and Dr. Ajit Ranade for the session. For more details, you can visit our website. Thank you once again, and we conclude the session here.